for joining us for today's webinar on building your safety program with data analytics. My name is Mackenzie Keller with the CSD Pool, and I am joined by Kyle Brown, our risk control consultant, and Lei Shi, our strategic risk programs advisor. As the name suggests, this presentation will focus on how you can take a database approach to improving safety and reducing risk at your district. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, you can put them in the chat so that our presenters can see them, and we will also have some time for questions at the end. Without further ado, Kyle and Lei, I will leave it up to you both.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mackenzie, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. As you mentioned, we're going to be talking about how we can build a safety program with data analytics. My name is Kyle Brown. I'm a senior risk control consultant with the Colorado Special District's Property and Liability Pool. I see a lot of familiar faces in the group. You've seen me at your districts or other places. I've been with the pool for 3 years now and have over 12 years of experience in the safety field. So that's kind of my background. I'll turn it over to Lei and let him kick us off.
Hey, morning, everyone. I'm the Strategic Risk Programs Advisor. I'm responsible for many aspects of the CSD Pool's operations, including data analysis, reporting, underwriting, finance, and innovation. I have been with the pool for about 13 years. I previously engaged directly with members and brokers on a daily basis, but over the last 5 years or so, my focus has shifted to more, technical and behind the scenes stuff that support the CSD pool. So I'm very happy to be here to share what I know. So Kyle, do you want to go over the training objectives for today before I talk about total cost of risk? Well, I guess today we have a few objectives. We will start with the total cost of risk, and then I will walk you through a stewardship report page by page. And then I will turn it over back to Kyle. He's going to review some sample loss runs, and then he will talk about, creating action items and learning from the past losses and identify any training opportunities. So I will get started on the total cost of risk. So why should you care about this? Because in risk management, insurance is the just the only part of the total cost of risk. So understanding what's in the total cost of risk helps you connect the dots between, your incident history, your financial obligations, and ultimately your ability to provide a safer and productive work environment. But for the purpose of today's webinar, we're just going to focus on the very simplified TCOR breakdown, so direct and indirect costs. So let's talk about direct costs first. There is insurance premium, obviously. This is what you pay into the Colorado Special District's pool. The amount of your contribution is determined by your payroll and your loss experience. And just like your personal auto insurance, if you have had a history of accidents or speeding tickets, you're going to pay more. So similarly, if your district has had multiple workplace injuries or a pattern of losses, you should expect your contribution to go up. And if you have a deductible on your policy, that means you're responsible for covering a portion of each loss. That adds to your total cost of risk. And there's also the internal time and resources, often your HR team or a designated safety coordinator spent on managing claims, communicating with the injured worker and coordinating with Cedric, our claims administrator. That time has a cost too, if you can quantify staff workload. And there are indirect costs. These are harder to quantify, but they are very real and can significantly add up over time. So, for example, if an injured employee, is out of work temporarily, they may return with limitations. In either case, your productivity is reduced. So someone else has to pick up the slack. That means paying coworkers overtime or bringing in temporary workers, both of which would cost more. And if the injury is serious enough that the employee can't just return to work, you'll have to hire and train a replacement. And we all know it's time consuming and expensive. Um, Workplace injuries don't just affect the injured worker, they affect the whole team. Morale can be low. People may feel anxious about safety or overworked from covering additional work duties. And we all know low morale can lead to turnover, disengagement, and future risks. So, putting it all together, understanding your total cost of risk gives you the power to make informed decisions, not just about how to finance risks, but how to build a safer organization. Earlier this year, we developed a stewardship report and we emailed you a copy back in May. While this stewardship report isn't all about, total cost of risk, it's actually designed to help you understand your performance, both in terms of your own data and how you compare to your peers across the pool. For instance, it shows like how your incident rate, your loss ratio, and if you qualify your experience modification factor stack up against others. So this report is actually a good starting point to look into your performance, start thinking about the total cost of risk and have a conversation with your safety management consultants to maintain or improve your safety management to reduce that cost. So if you haven't had a chance to review it, or if you can find your copy, let us know. We're happy to um, send it to you. Mackenzie, can you bring up the stewardship report? Thank you. So in front of you is a stewardship report, and I will walk you through this report page by page. Um, okay, so here's page one. So here it gives you a quick overview of your workers' comp coverage. You will see your annual contribution, whether you have a deductible, if you are cost containment certified, and if the effective date of your policy. And just below that, there is a table showing discounts. In this example, the member does not receive um, a multi-program discount because they only have workers' comp coverage with the pool, and they do not receive a direct discount because they're working through a broker. So you don't get a direct discount if you have a broker. Um, so here it helps you spot opportunities. Are you potentially missing out on discounts that could lower your cost? On the top right, you will see whether you're participating in various training programs. Some of them might not be familiar to you, and that's fine. We encourage you to check our website or reach out to us if you're interested in learning more. Below that, you will see the estimated payroll by class code. So this information is provided by each member at renewal. So when you review your own report, if you notice any significant discrepancies, let us know. We can work with you to do a true up. Remember, workers' comp contribution is rated on payroll. The more payroll you have, the higher contribution will be. So making sure your estimated payroll is accurate, that'll help you avoid a surprise bill during the year-end payroll audit. And moving on to the next page, here we focus on incident rate and loss ratio. So what is an incident rate? It's basically a metric that tells you how many full-time equivalent employees experienced workplace injuries in a given year. Now, full-time equivalent is different from full-time employee, okay? Many of our members employ part-time workers or volunteers. So for reporting purposes, we estimate that each part-time or volunteer position equals about 10% of a full-time employee. So, for example, 10 part-time workers would count as one full-time equivalent. That said, we know, this may not always be the right assumption for every member. So if your number suggests otherwise, let us know because we can easily adjust the assumption and send you an updated report. Back to our example here. In 2024, the member had 23 full-time equivalent employees and 6 workers' comp claims. So that gives us an incident rate of 27%, right? 6 divided by 23, that's 27%. So that basically means that based on the current data, for every 100 employees, you would expect to see about 27 claims. This member is a fire district, so we have compared them to other fire districts in the program. You will notice that this member's incident rate was higher than the group average in most years except for 2020 and 2021. On the right side, there's a loss ratio table. This compares, what the member has paid in contributions against what was paid out and reserved in claims. So, for example, in 2024, this fire district, paid about $66,000 in contributions. The pool was expected to pay out about $156,000 in claims. So that's a loss ratio of 237%. That's basically the claims, $156,000 divided by $66,000 in contributions, right? On the other hand, the average loss ratio for all other fire districts was just 53%. So that gives you a comparison. Now, as a rule of thumb, a loss ratio over 75% generally means that you're a deficit contributor to the program. Why? Because about 25% of your contributions go into administrative expenses, like the cost of reinsurance, third-party administrator fees, financial audit, and actuary services. So if your loss ratio exceeds 75%, the program has to increase your rates and actually everywhere else to make up for your losses. And then moving on to the next page, here, this page breaks down losses by class code, basically showing where your losses are coming from. In this example here, all losses come from firefighters. There were 33 claims in total, 3 of which were incident only. So what are incident only claims? Okay, these are reports made for documentation purposes. They're often like near misses. For example, if an employee was involved in a minor car accident while driving a district vehicle and reported no injury, you probably still want to report it as an incident only claim because that helps you identify potential hazard even when no medical attention is needed. Okay. And then moving on to the next page, we dive deeper into types of claims, medical only, indemnity, and incident only. So at the top, you will see the number of claims by type, and then at the bottom, the associated losses in dollar amounts. So this comparison also includes peer data. They're highlighted in blue. Indemnity claims, also known as lost wage claims, are the most expensive type of claims. They often result from injuries severe enough to prevent an employee from working. So, for instance, in 2024, this fire district had 2 medical-only claims totaling just $1,000. But they have 4 indemnity claims for about $161,000. Medical only claims can also escalate into indemnity claims if the injury isn't treated properly or quickly. That's why early intervention and timely care are so critical, not just for employee well-being, but for controlling workers' comp cost. Here on the last three columns, you will also see the members' total claim counts and losses by year compared to the other fire districts. So for this member, they have they represent 3% of the total losses among all fire districts in 2024. And moving on to the next page, here it lists the top 10 claims from the last 5 years. We highlight recurring causes and body parts. This helps you pinpoint specific, job functions or risk areas that might be driving losses. For example, if you see multiple shoulder injuries from hose lifting, it might be worth revisiting your training procedures or evaluating whether, certain personal protective equipment or even administrative changes could reduce that risk. So this is exactly the kind of conversation to have with your safety management consultant. And then here on this page, the table on the left shows losses by month over the last 5 years. That helps you identify whether your claims have any seasonal patterns. In this case, claims are more frequent in the third and fourth quarters. So if you see something similar in your own report, just take a moment to reflect, what's happening during those months. Are there any specific tasks or events driving those losses? And then on the right side, there's a table showing how long it took to file those claims. In 2023, for example, this member had unusually high filing delays. That's definitely a red flag. Why the delay? I mean, was there uncertainty around whether the claim should be filed, or was there a breakdown in communication? Like we said earlier, delays in treatment can turn minor injuries into serious ones. So that increases costs and hurts your employees. So if your report shows long delays, it's worth investigating and addressing the root cause. And then moving on to the experience modification, not every member qualifies for an EMOD. Your manual contribution before, the manual contribution is different from your invoice amount because the difference is from various rating factors like discounts and surcharges. So, but your manual contribution must be greater than a certain threshold to qualify for an EMOD. For those who do qualify, the EMOD is a key cost driver or saver. It's basically a multiplier applied to your contribution to reflect your claim history relative to your payroll size. So an EMOD below 1 earns you a discount. Above 1, you pay a surcharge. For example, in this case, this fire district has an EMOD of 0.81 in 2024 and 2025. So they're getting a 19% discount. The average EMOD for fire districts is about 1.08, and this member ranks 7th overall. The best in this group has an EMOD of 0.56. The highest is 2.23. So you can see that's a pretty large gap. Somebody is getting a 44% discount, and then the other is getting a surcharge of 123%. So how is EMOD calculated? Short answer, it's very complicated. But here, for the purpose of today's webinar, I guess all you need to know is that the EMOD is based on your payroll and loss history over the last 3 years, excluding the year the EMOD was produced. So for 2025, It's actually based on your data from 2021 to 2023. We skipped 2024 because that's the year when your 2025 EMI was produced. Okay. Larger payrolls and fewer losses generally lead to lower EMODs. Smaller payrolls and more losses lead to higher ones. And if you have a higher deductible, that can also reduce your EMOD over time because, a higher deductible means you retain a larger portion of losses. So fewer loss dollars are included in the EMOD calculations. If your EMOD is consistently below 1, congratulations. That reflects solid safety management. If it's consistently above 1, your report itself might help you pinpoint why. But if not, we're happy to take a deeper dive and work with you to figure out why. Moving on to the next page here. This is the safety grant utilization page. If you're not familiar, our safety grant program reimburses members for safety-related expenses like training and personal protective equipment. Each year, you receive an allocation based on your contribution size and years in the program. Unused dollars often expire after 5 years. So in this example here, the member still has over $8,000 available. That's real money, so don't leave it on the table. If you need help with eligible expenses or just a reimbursement process, our team is here to assist you. And then finally, I think I'm kind of running out of time here. There's a table showing how your contribution might change under different payroll and loss ratio scenarios. So in this example here, the current contribution is about $57,000 based on a 58% loss ratio. If payroll increases by 20% and the loss ratio stays the same, that number could go up to $68,000, right? That number at the bottom. I don't know if you can see my pointer, but likewise, if the loss ratio climbs to 98%, the contribution could increase to $95,000. That said, you shouldn't take those numbers to the bank because this is not a predictive model. The actual rating system is way more complicated. Here, we just want to illustrate how different variables like loss ratio, payroll could affect your contribution. If you're preparing your budget like in August, September, and if you need a more accurate estimate for next year, let us know. We should be able to provide you with a more accurate projection for the upcoming renewal. So I guess that concludes our walkthrough of the stewardship report. I hope this helps you understand your data and take some meaningful action to maintain or improve your workers' comp outcomes and your total cost of risk. Whether it's reducing injuries, managing costs, or making the most of the available programs, we're here to support you. And again, if you have any questions about your own report, let us know. We're all available. Any questions before I turn it to Kyle? Oh, I can see in the chat there was a question. When was this report generated? It was generated in May. We emailed everybody a copy. If you can't locate it, let us know. We'll be able to send you a copy.
All right. If there's no other questions, it looks like we're back to the presentation. Lei, I want to thank you for covering the introduction. I give about half of our topics, and then I realized that I was on mute. So thank you for covering that. I am unmuted this time and ready to run with the loss run. So Lei was kind enough to cover the stewardship report. And now I'm going to talk about the loss run. So the stewardship report is really a snapshot of the district. How are we doing? What do our numbers look like? And in my opinion, you can use the loss run report that we're about to go over for the next 6 slides or so to answer the question of why do we have the numbers that we do in the stewardship report, and where are our trouble areas coming from that we can hopefully work to improve. So with the first section of the loss run report, you will see the 15 causes of loss by gross incurred. So whenever it says gross incurred, we are ranking these by how much they cost the district. So whenever you see a big one here, like we'll even say strain by injury for $445,000, that could be a combination of 10 injuries adding up to that, or it could be a combination of only a single injury that adds up to that cost. But I think the key takeaway there is we're looking at what our heavy hitters are for our districts. Where are our teammates getting injured? And we can take this data, and what our real goal is to look at it and say, what can we do as a district to help stop that? So for this specific example, again, just a generic district, we have pushing and pulling and lifting as our top causes of loss. And once we look at those and see it, we can dive a little bit deeper into our data, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, how we get to those data points, and ask the questions of what are our teammates doing while they're pushing and pulling to cause these losses? What are they lifting that's causing these losses? And then, of course, most importantly, now that we know where these losses are coming from, how do we decrease those? Specifically looking at pushing and pulling from 2 ways. If it's costing the district $1.3 million almost over the last 5 years, we want to look at it from, we want to keep our teammates safe, so we've got to do something to change this. And then kind of thinking back to Lay's report, that loss ratio was over 200% in 2024. I'm guessing that a decent amount of those came from the pushing and pulling injuries, and in which case, what would our EMOD, what would our loss ratios look like if we tackled something like that and cut it in half? And we're going to kind of talk in a few slides about what that specifically looks like and how we can create those action items, but right now we're just going to keep running through the report. And the next slide is also going to cover the nature of injury. So whenever we think of nature of injury, we think of what actually happened. So we saw that the injuries were caused by pushing or pulling or lifting. Those were our top 2. But whenever we think of nature of injury, it's what did that pushing and pulling cause? No surprise here is a sprain or tear. I think that we can all relate to at some point in our life, whenever we push or pulled or tripped over something, that's typically what happens. We sprain our ankle, we sprain a shoulder, or in the worst case scenario, we tear something. So looking into this in a little bit more depth, you can see that these sprains or tears are almost responsible for $4.5 million. And then we can, again, touch on this in a little bit, start to think of how we create action items to protect our employees from sprains or tears. Is it creating a stretching program? Is it partnering with a physical therapist so that we can catch these problems on the front end before they turn into those big surgeries that are end up costing us $4.5 million? And then we have some other sections in here. Some of these can be a little broad, some of them can be very specific. So all other injuries doesn't really tell us a whole lot. In a section like that, we would probably want to dive into the data and see what those specifically add up to. Our next one is one that's semi-surprising to me, and that's a herniated disc, so a back issue. But what we do in this report is we show the top 15 causes, because for a district, and I do believe this is a rather large district, looking at the causes, there might be 75 different ones, and that amount of data is really just an overload. So what we do in this report is we break it down to 15 so you can kind of focus on your heavy hitters. And I do want to touch on this before I go any further. The stewardship report was mailed out, but this report is available upon request. And moving to the next slide. We have body parts. So still going in with what's causing our injuries. We're looking at the different types of injuries. We are looking at what caused those injuries, what was hurt, and now we're going to be talking about body parts. So whenever we're actually getting these injuries, these sprains from pushing and pulling and lifting, what body parts are we typically injuring? I think it's of no surprise here that the number one cause is the lower back. Then we also have the knee, the shoulders. So what we can do here is, again, if we're looking at a workout program, if we're looking at some kind of physical therapy or something to prevent these before they become large claims, we kind of have an idea of what body parts to target. Next slide, please. Yes, now we have the injuries by the claimant's age. So this is basically the person who filed the workers' comp claim or who was injured, it's their age. And we definitely don't do this to discriminate by age or anything, but there's a couple things that we can see by age. This one looks pretty obvious. It seems like most of our injuries happen anywhere from that 30 to 40 age range. And I think that oftentimes there's very explainable answers to why this is. And my guess would be that most of the workforce here falls within that age range. But what we really want to look out for is if we have people who, let's say, fall below that 20 mark in the top column, then we want to ask, is this their first job? What expectations do they have for working? Are we not training them enough in proper work procedures to keep them from getting injured? On the flip side, if we go down to the 65 to 70 range, if that looked like the 30 to 35 range, we might want to start asking ourselves questions like, does this person need assistance doing this job? Is there a better way that we can do that to help them out without putting them at risk? So we do want to be mindful of what our limitations are, whether it be knowledge, whether it be pre-existing conditions, and make sure that we're matching the job to the person or providing them with the materials that they need. Going on to the next slide, it is going to be very similar to the one that I was just talking about. And this is going to be the injury by tenure. And when we say tenure, that's how long that individual has been working with the district. And whenever I think of this, it's, like I said, very similar to age. But there's not really any conclusive data here. Well, it kind of does show me a trend. It looks like the majority of our injuries happen for employees who have been there from 1 to 5 years. And looking at that, that would almost tell me, looking at this specific district, maybe we as our leadership, our safety coordinator, whoever it may be for the district, need to stop and think, are we doing enough onboarding? Because maybe they're not getting the proper training, and then that's why after a year they're experiencing all of these injuries. Another possibility for this specific scenario could very well be maybe most of our employees only are here from 1 to 5 years, or maybe we have a bunch of seasonals that just kind of fall in that range. So there's a lot of different things, but what these reports are really made to do is get your head to start brainstorming and asking those questions of why are these things happening and what trends are we looking for? Because that's really the whole purpose of everything that Leigh and I have been going over today, is to help you as a district understand, one, that we have these reports available here for you, and two, to understand how to utilize them to help out your district. Because I've given these reports to both the top in class district, we saw that on the EMOD page Leigh presented, and I've given them to the worst in class district. And let me tell you, those are two very different conversations, but they're conversations that need to be had. Now, going back to this injury by tenure, let's say we look at the 30 plus years. And it's not something we're going to look at by the age of the employee, but maybe it's something we need to look at from the scope of maybe it's more of a complacency issue. You know, I have that whole mentality. I've been here for 25 years. I've always done it this way. I'm never going to change it. And maybe that's where you need to focus your efforts on changing that mindset. So these reports really just show you the specifics of what you're doing, where you're at, and why your numbers look the way they do. One thing I do want to point out for the injury by tenure, This is not based on a cost amount. It's based by the number of incidents. So you can see that for the 1 through 5 range, it's 497, not $497,000, 497 incidents over the last 5 years. Next slide, please. So the next part is really our call to action. Because one thing that I've noticed, and I see a lot of familiar faces on here, I believe we've even been through these reports together, is you can collect all the data in the world and have every data point possible, but it's really all for naught if we're not doing anything about it. So the real purpose of our presentation today, on top of letting you know that it's here, is to let you know that you can use that information to show trends, to create action items. Let's go back to the first page of the stewardship report. You don't actually have to skip to it. I'm just saying let's go back there mentally. Our top 2 causes of loss were pushing and pulling. If we were to go out and meet with this district, I would ask them, what are you doing about your pushing and pulling injuries? And what do you need to do to prevent them? I think that it can be really broken down into 3 simple questions that you should be asking your district, or you should be asking yourself if you're the person, that decision maker for the district. 1, what happened? By this question, we mean what injuries occurred that led us to these loss rates? Second question is, why did it happen? Read the event description, interview employees, interview witnesses to the injuries, and then break it down to why did it happen? Were they not wearing PPE? Were they in a Friday mindset where it was, I'm going to cut a few corners so I can get home as soon as possible? Was it something as simple as they weren't trained? We changed the procedure, but we never notified anybody about it, so they weren't really sure what they needed to do. And the last question is, what do we do about it as our corrective action? So I'm just going to give an example here because it's something I've seen pretty continuously with fire districts over the last couple of years. Our number 1 was pushing or pulling or lifting. Those were our top 2. And I feel like those could both be attributed to throwing ladders. I have definitely seen a lot of injuries for that. So let's run that through the question. What happened? Well, let's just say an employee pulled a shoulder muscle while they were throwing a ladder. Well, why did it happen? Were they not using the buddy system? Were they not properly trained? Were they trying to show off for their friends during the training? And what can we do to make sure that it doesn't happen again? Well, maybe it's a stretching routine. Maybe it's throwing a ladder with a buddy. And there could be any one of those things that you can do to help create that corrective action. Another thing that I really want to challenge you all with is if you have a safety committee, that's phenomenal. Show them these reports. I would say that the stewardship report is probably a little too high level for your everyday safety committee. That's really more designed for our district leadership, but especially the loss run. When they're looking at the trends, seeing the top causes of loss, seeing the top nature of loss, present that to your safety committees and have them answer the question. We see the issue. What can we do to help protect the rest of our team? I feel like that's great buy-in too, especially if your safety committee is represented at all levels, because then you get different opinions and different approaches to fixing these things. And once you come up with the issues, it may be something along the lines of, we need to completely revamp our training policy. We need to update our safety manual because we have a policy in there that doesn't even reflect to what we're doing now. But the key thing is to notice that all of these injuries don't happen by accident. That almost, what was it, like $1.3 million in a push and pulling in injuries was not just by chance. They happened, and they happened for a reason. So your guys' real job is to dive in and figure out why they happened and have the discussion of what you can do to make sure that they don't happen again. Once I get to the end here, I am going to discuss a couple resources that can help you come to those conclusions. But honestly, once you get into it, maybe it's just Leigh and I talking because we really enjoy these things, but data can be really interesting. Going back to discussing the fire district, Leigh was talking about the quarters where they had a lot of injuries. Whenever I go out and present that to a fire district, I can almost always tell them the month that their cadet academy occurs based on what that looks like. And that would be a discussion along the lines of, what can we do during our cadet academy to get these numbers down? Is it more training on the front end about stretching, reporting injuries, so on and so forth? Next slide, please. So we've really covered the two different types of reports we have. We've covered what you're supposed to do with that data. So figure out where things are happening and correct them. But one thing I really encourage you all to do as well, if you don't have one, something our team can help you develop, and if it's something you do have, that's great, is creating a proactive analysis. So one, I'm not going to say problem, but one kind of limiting factor to the data that Leigh and I presented is they're all lagging indicators, meaning that the injury already happened. But what you really need to do once you correct all the issues from your lagging indicators is you need to develop a proactive response. So that goes to, how can we look at trends within our district to correct these issues before they even become injuries? So that's exactly what a near-miss reporting program is. I'll give the example of, let's say an employee is going into an office during the winter. They slip walking in the front door, they catch themselves, everything is fine, but they notice that they slip because of the ice. The near-miss program will be, you report that to your supervisor, to the safety committee, whomever you've designated at your district, and you report that slipping on ice. And you go through those same questions. What happened? Well, I almost slipped on ice. Why did it happen? I didn't have max tracks on. Nobody shoveled the sidewalk. And what can we do? We can shovel the sidewalk. We can provide PPE. But the whole idea about that is we're encouraging people to prevent things before they become injuries. Because let's say that employee told their supervisor, they immediately go shovel off a sidewalk. That hazard is eliminated. Nobody else is going to slip on that ice because it's been corrected. But let's say that employee had the mindset of, well, I got out of here pretty well. That was lucky. Hope it doesn't happen to anybody else. And then each time that the same people walk across that ice and slip, you have a higher potential for injuries. One example that I like to give for this is the pyramid example. So right here on the right side of the page, you see 130 and 300. That's just a basic number for every 300 near misses, there will be 30 injuries, and there will be one severe injury. So I'm going to use a pretty universal example here. Let's say that you have a cord going across your main office floor because it powers the water cooler. This cord is normally buried under some kind of cover to prevent tripping, but you recently had to replace it, and nobody's gotten to it yet. Out of people going in there, in and out, every day, let's just say it's 300 times that cord will be crossed. Out of those 300 times, you're going to have 30 times that people are going to trip and fall and be okay. But one out of those 30 trips is going to result in an injury that could potentially lead to time off work, a doctor's appointment, whatever it may be. So what we're trying to do with the near miss, let's pretend that same cord happens. And each of you on here, because you're obviously very safety conscious, so you're going to be the ones paying attention to this, you notice the cord, and you immediately put down the supplies, whatever it is, the cover, so that it's no longer a trip hazard. That means that the other 299 instances of crossing that cord do not occur. That also means that the other 30 trips did not occur, and the one injury didn't occur. That's why near-miss reporting is so important. And also, track your near-miss data as you go through this, because if you have 30 vehicular near misses, but no injuries, no accidents, just near misses, maybe that's time for you as a district to look and say, maybe we need to get some type of driver training. Maybe we need to do some practical for our drivers to make sure they know what they're doing. Or it could be really anything. I always go back to slips, trips, and falls because that's probably the most common injury type that we see at our districts. But you can still look in and say, I have 30 slips, trips, and falls reported in the maintenance office, but 0 in the actual main office. So that would tell you that maybe we get our safety committee together, and we do a walk around at the maintenance office, and we report any slips, trips, or falls hazards and try to correct those. Another thing I want to say is that you should also encourage the reporting of hazards. So I think some people get in the weeds sometime with the near-miss program that you can only report things that almost hurt you. But we also want to encourage our teammates to not only report things to where they slipped but caught themselves, but maybe they just see something. It's really in creating that environment of if you see something, say something. And whenever I think about that, I always go to offices. I'll pick on you office folks for a second. One of my biggest things that I see in offices is a power strip plugged into a power strip. Well, necessarily that's not a near miss because nothing has happened yet. Nobody was injured from it, but you can still see it and still know that it's a hazard. And with that, you can correct that hazard and maybe use that as an educational moment. You give the person who reports it to you some kind of a reward. You write up a little safety share to send out to all of your districts so that they know to look for power strips plugged into power strips. The whole mindset behind this is everything that you guys find on the front end, aka that proactive approach, is something that's not going to injure an employee. Because if you remove the ice, that ice is no longer there as a trip hazard. I hope that that makes sense to everybody. And one thing I want to keep you guys in mind with, just as we wrap up, is you are never finished. Because that's something really great about developing that proactive safety culture. The more that you encourage your team to report near misses, to find hazard shares, the more that they're going to want to keep looking because they're going to feel empowered. Just like Lay was talking about, multiple injuries can damage morale. But being in a district where they encourage employees to point out unsafe behaviors and then you fix them, that's going to build morale. That's going to make them think, wow, these people actually care about my safety, and that's going to create more buy-in. So the more you do this, the more work you're going to come up with. But I will say it's going to be different styles of work. By that, I mean, whenever you first start this program, you might be seeing some of the glaring things like power strips on power strips, icy sidewalks, things that are definitely imminent hazards. But once you do it for a while, maybe your district starts to get more proactive, and they're not like, we need to do this because employees are getting injured. They start to take the best practice approach where there's a slight possibility that something could happen. Let's say that you have a step in one of your warehouses, and that step blends in with all the other colors of the concrete. You paint that orange so everybody knows where the elevation change is. You start to notice little things like that and correct them so that they do not become an injury. And also, I'm going to kind of wrap up on some of the resources that we have at the pool to help you guys analyze your data. So I want to start by stating the obvious. The two reports we went through, the stewardship report and the loss run, that is something that we can go over on site at your district and kind of explain everything and what your numbers look like to you. One thing that I really like to mention about this is, very specifically, as we're going through and we look at the loss run and we look at your loss ratios, we're going to be able to have in-person conversations of why those numbers look like that and what we've seen other districts do to correct those. Taking that a step forward, we have Vector EHS, which is something that we can provide our members a demo with, and what that is, it's an online reporting database, because while Lay and I do have very great data, we are limited by what's reported when an injury occurs. But if you use Vector, which allows you to track that information yourself, you can get a lot more specific. You can answer questions like, what was the weather like during that time of day? You could even go down to the person's color of their shirt if you wanted to, just so you can get stronger data. Another thing that we have is safety training. We can come on site in person. We do a hazard recognition course where we're actually training your team to be on the lookout for those near miss or hazards that need to be reported. We can also do injury investigation breakdown. So we can look at those what numbers, we can look at the specific injury details that cause those numbers on the loss run and stewardship report so we can get a little bit more in depth for those corrective actions. We kept everything pretty high level today, but it's still worth mentioning. Can also do a safety walkthrough. The reason why I mention this is because it's an extra set of eyes. I always give the example of one of our loss control team from the pool is walking through your district. We're not doing it to pick on you. we're an extra set of eyes that we might catch something you didn't. I always say if somebody comes into my house, you're going to pick out a safety hazard that I didn't notice just because I live here every day. And when you're around something, you're more likely to miss it. We also have the skid truck for any of the driver training or if you have a driver safety concern. And last but not least, I definitely wanted to touch on the safety and loss prevention grant funds. As Lay showed for that one district, there were $8,500. And what I always challenge districts to do is to take and look at what was your top cause of loss. Oh, that was pushing and pulling. The second one was lifting. And then you dive in and figure out why those occurred exactly. And then you think, wow, we have $8,500 in safety grant funds. How can we utilize that money to help prevent our pushing and pulling injuries? How can we utilize that money to help prevent our lifting injuries? How can we use it to help our district? And in closing, before we dive into questions, I want to leave you by a quote. It's definitely been used in a lot different contexts, but I'm going to put a safety spin on it today. It's by George Santayana. It says, "For those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." And for you guys, what I think that means is if you do not remember what's causing your injuries and you don't dive into that, you're bound to keep having those injuries keep occurring. So that's why it's good to study your injuries and figure out how you can prevent them for the end. And that is all I had. Any questions?
While people are putting those questions in the chat, I will take this opportunity to remind, oh, am I audible?
Yeah, I've got you.
Okay, perfect. While people are taking the opportunity to put those questions in the chat for Kyle and Lay, I will take the opportunity to remind you that if you like this presentation and you want to be sure that you have this information available, if you look in the upper right corner of your screen, you are able to download this file for yourself to be able to go through and look at it at your leisure. And then also the recording of this presentation will be sent out afterwards so that you can hear Kyle and Lay give this wonderful information all over again as many times as you like. And this would usually be the time where I talk about some of the resources that the CSD Pool has available, but Kyle did a pretty awesome job of covering it already. The only thing I would add is that if you just want to see everything that we have available for you, our website is www.csdpool.org, and that'll have all the information about all the resources that Kyle mentioned, and also information about how to have Kyle come out to your district for yourself and take a look at anything that could be improved. I'll wait a couple more seconds to see if anyone has any questions, but Kyle, Lay, I've got one question for you. I know that, we provide the stewardship report and then also go through and talk about what can be improved at the district. In your experience, do districts tend to keep records already that could be useful for improving the safety program where they are, or is that something that people don't usually tend to keep records of until something has happened?
As far as something very high level that shows all of the injury data, that's not something that districts typically tend to keep themselves. But I will say I have been to districts who are very proactive about creating their safety culture, and they set up things with us where they're like, we would like to see the loss run report quarterly, and which we can do that for them as well. And there are some other districts who have and utilize programs like Vector EHS for near-miss reporting. So there are some that do it, but I would say the majority just rely on us for the information.
And just as a reminder, you can request a loss run or a storage report at any time. We typically send out a storage report twice a year, but you don't have to wait for us. If you are interested in your own data, just let us know. We'll deliver.
All right, awesome. I'm not currently seeing any questions in the chat, so unless I see something pop up in the next 3 seconds, I'm going to say that's probably it for today. Kyle, Lay, thank you both so much for presenting today. That was incredibly informative, and thank you to everyone who took time out of your busy schedules to attend. We're very happy to have you, and we hope that you got something out of this. Like I said, the recording will be sent out afterwards, so I hope you all have a wonderful day.
Yes, thank you, everybody.
Thank
Don't
you.
hesitate to reach out if we can help.